Hi guys, this is art teacher Willow, and I'm here to do my first time-lapse video with a little bit of voiceover so that you have some guidance. I've chosen to do a cat portrait in watercolor. I do a lot of pet portraits and teach pet portraits, and you can see I've already sketched this one out, and I'm going to start in with my warm undertones. But before you go into that, think about adding some masking fluid. You can see that the whiskers look a little gray and around the eyes. That's masking fluid that I have put onto the paper to protect that area so that later I can erase the masking fluid and it will leave the paper underneath perfectly crisp and white. So I've done that with my masking pen ahead of time. So I'm just adding all those beautiful layers, those undertones, and now I'm going in with my second layer. My second layer is mostly Payne's Gray with a touch of cobalt blue. I really love to add those dynamic colors in there. And each time I add a brush stroke, I'm then softening it by dipping my brush into the water. With a damp brush, I go over my brush strokes so that everything kind of blends together nicely. So again, I'm touching in my paint colors, dipping into some clean water, dabbing off my brush, and then going over those lines with a little water just to soften them so that all the hairs on the cat look really nice and soft. This is a good technique for painting any kind of pet portraits. You don't really need to paint every individual hair, you just need to give the illusion of hair. And a good tip for that is to make sure that you are going in the direction of the hair. Really look at your subject or look at your reference photo and make sure you're constantly going in the direction of the hair. Another little tip is make sure that you leave a little white. I'm sure you've heard this with watercolor, but it's a nice tip. Just a little relief, a little white, a little paper shining through. You don't want to smother your paper. If you smother your paper, sometimes your painting can look a little heavy, and the beauty of watercolor is that you're really utilizing your paper as part of your palette. So you can see I'm continuing in adding a little bit of that fur ruff around the chest, and now I'm adding a little bit more of my yellow mixed with brown and a little orange mixed with brown. All the colors, I should say, for this are custom mixed. That is not a tube yellow I'm using, that is just simply my rose madder mixed with my cadmium yellow. And I'm custom mixing all my colors just because I feel it adds a layer of artistry to the process. I'm adding a little more red and a little bit more of that orange to give it warmth and add a little warmth to the edge of the face. Really look at the lights as they hit your subject, and also make sure that you're looking at where the light source is, where your shadows are. So I'm touching in my second and third layers now, continuing on with my mixtures of brown, Payne's Gray, cobalt blue. I'm doing the eye, so I'm adding a little bit of that sap green, keeping it really light. Now there is masking fluid on the eye, so you're not going to see the full effect of the eye until I take that masking fluid off. And I'm continuing up to the head where I'm adding almost the first layer up there, touching in where the stripes would be. I feel like the stripes are the most difficult thing for this kitty cat. I didn't want them to look too direct. I wanted them to look like they were still a little bit softened, not too edgy and hard. And you can see I just did some wet on wet to add some really nice dramatic dark tones to the ear. I wet it first and then I touched in the Payne's Gray. Now I'm touching in a nice plum mixture to the other ear, to the warm side of the face, and continuing on with those little stripes. And really remember to always go in the direction of the fur. You don't have to paint every little bit of fur on, every little hair on, but you do need to go in the direction of the fur. This really helps. And layer your paints. It gives your colors much more dynamics. One thing to think about is that as you're adding your paint, you're also going to have a lot of difference in the value once it dries. In other words, once you put on the pigment, it's going to dry about 30% lighter because it is watercolor. So now you can see I'm adding a third layer on, just really giving some details to the nose. One of the things I like to do with my watercolor pet portraits is I add more detail to the things that I want to highlight. For this, I'm highlighting the face, of course, so I'm going to add more crisp brush strokes, more details, and more hair individually painted right around the face so that it really draws your focus to the face. Whereas I'm going to leave the body a little more soft focus, a little more blended. Adding another layer to the eyes now. And again, my technique is putting on that paint, rinsing off my brush, and then softening that paint, softening the edges. Now I need to go in and darken some of my darker colors so they really stand out. I'm just really building up those soft layers. I love the blues that are coming out. So I'm taking off the masking fluid. Now you can see the light, the highlight in those eyes, but I do need to darken around those eyes. So I'm adding in that dark, and I'm not using black. I find sometimes black can be very harsh and deceiving and can draw attention from all your colors. So I like to pick a color that highlights. Sometimes I'll use a dark plum, sometimes Payne's gray, sometimes a deep forest green, or sometimes a custom mixed nearly black. But I often don't choose just black. Still gives the illusion of black though. So I'm going in for some of my final little details, making sure everything is nice and contrasted, making sure there's little hairs showing. And again, because it dries so much lighter, you really have to put so many layers. I would say I definitely do about 4 or 5 good layers for every pet portrait. Now I should say that I took the masking fluid off of the eyes, but I did not take the masking fluid off of the whiskers as I am still painting the body. And if you are watching this, you can go ahead and find me on Instagram at Willow Heath, or you could find just my watercolor paintings by looking up hashtag Willow's Watercolors. And right now I'm using a Winsor Newton 140 pound cold pressed paper, and it's their watercolor block, and it's really wonderful. I switched to using this over using my Canson paper and using my Arches paper simply because it has the quality of the Arches paper and it has a higher quality than the Canson paper. So I'm taking off now the whisker masking fluid. So you can see how the whiskers now are nice and bright white. And I'm adding in my final little details and little wispy hairs and giving crispness to the edges, any final details. So again, I was using the Windsor Newton paper, and I'm using many different paints, Windsor Newton paint and Sennelier paint, and I'm using my Princeton Select brushes. I will include a list of all of my supplies below, and again, this is art teacher Willow, and you can find me on Instagram at Willow Heath. Thank you for watching my first time-lapse video.